welcome everybody. My name is Ann English, as Carolyn said. I'm on the board of directors for My Dog Is My Home. I've been working in LA County in efforts to end homelessness for over 2 decades. I'm a lifelong animal lover, and I can't imagine a scenario where I was asked to relinquish my pets in exchange for anything, let alone something I really needed, like housing or shelter or services. I'm also a member of the Domestic Violence Homeless Services Coalition in Los Angeles, which works to build bridges between domestic violence providers and homeless services providers. I have to say that I personally have never seen a more compelling example of how important the emotional support of a beloved pet can be than by the many stories that I've had access to and heard from survivors of domestic violence who either wouldn't leave their abuser or return time and again to their abuser, specifically over concerns for the welfare of their animal companions. So I think this is a really timely and important discussion that we're having. And so I want to introduce our first speaker, Allie Phillips. She's going to be speaking about the organization she founded and for which she serves as CEO, Sheltering Animals and Families Together, or SAFETY, a life-saving initiative. Allie is internationally recognized attorney, author, public speaker, and advocate for animals and vulnerable victims. She received the 2018 Trailblazer Award from Urban Resource Institute and was awarded as a top defender of animals in 2015 for her innovative work with domestic violence pet sheltering. She's a legal expert on the linkage between violence to animals and people, therapy animals helping crime victims, and sheltering pets of domestic violence. She created the first written guidelines on housing pets at family violence shelters, and as a sought-after consultant whose work has been featured in the Washington Post and on National Public Radio, among other things. So welcome, Allie.
Thank you. Thank you. It's wonderful to be here. And so I'm going to give you a crash course in sheltering animals and families together. I just want to kind of give you an overview of that and what this organization has been doing for upwards of 20 years when it comes to housing pets of domestic violence. So this entire concept that literally was downloaded into my brain when I was a prosecuting attorney is really centered in the foundation of how animal abuse links with child abuse, domestic violence, and elder abuse. And when we look at how pets are part of the family, over 2/3 of American homes have a pet. And children often grow up with pets, and women are the primary caretaker of pets. And this all can come together in a situation where if there is violence in a home, what is that family going to do if they have a pet? Because we're looking at 10 million women and men who are victims of interpersonal violence on an annual basis in this country, and approximately 674,000 children are maltreated every year. And so when I do the math, and trust me, I am not a mathematician, but when I do the math, that is at least 6.8 million pets of domestic violence who are in harm's way. So for the past 2 decades, there's been a growing body of research on the link between animal abuse, domestic violence, child abuse, and elder abuse. And the numbers are consistent among different countries and actually confirm our worst fears. That shelter women are more likely to report that their pets have been threatened, harmed, and even killed. And I could spend 90 minutes simply going through the research, and I do that at a lot of conferences. But we find that up to 65% of domestic violence victims remain in the home and in harm's way in order to keep their pets and their animals safe. And then when we look at children growing up in homes experiencing violence, they are more likely to become violent offenders because of what they witness. And I think we can all agree that children are sponges. They are taught behaviors by what they witness. And this then cycles into a next generation of violent offenders. And when it comes to research about escaping violence with pets and other animals, survivors in one study wanted to be asked about pets at intake. They wanted their veterinarians to offer safe options. They wanted domestic violence shelters to be pet friendly. And so when I look at shelters just in the United States, and my organization is a global program, we work worldwide. But when we look just in the United States and having over 1,600 shelters in just one 24-hour period, according to the last survey that was done in 2019, 68% of callers did not have their needs met. And I wonder how many of those were pet related. So the solution is the Sheltering Animals and Families Together program. And I'm going to talk in just a minute about how I actually came up with this, but the first written guidelines launched 13 years ago. And this is the first and the only global initiative working with domestic violence shelters across the world to help provide safe space for survivors and their pets, and to break down the barriers for those survivors who do have pets. And so the manual, which was recently updated and the third edition is now available, is a free download for domestic violence shelters at safetyprogram.org. And so when I look at what is happening across the United States, we got a lot of green. I will tell you, when I first started working on this about 20 years ago, there were none. And when I wrote the first set of guidelines, there were 4 pet-friendly domestic violence shelters. And now we're well over 250. I still have about another 60 that I am confirming to make sure that they meet the safety qualifications. But we still have some areas that do not have pet-friendly shelters, like Hawaii, Nebraska, Washington, D.C., Delaware, Rhode Island, and Maine, which I understand is in progress. But this is huge progress, but yet we need more. And so this concept is something that I created back in, I don't even remember if it was 1996 or 97, but it was when I was a frontline prosecutor handling domestic violence court. And one particular woman wanted me to dismiss her charges because, in her words, I will never forget these, "I would rather go home and die trying to save my 2 dogs and goat than to have him kill another one of my pets." And I was baffled by that. I couldn't understand why she couldn't get into shelter with her pets. And the local shelter laughed and hung up the phone on me when I asked if she could come into shelter. And it was literally in that moment that this entire concept came to be. And I've been talking about it ever since and growing this ever since. And the foundation for this is really the human-animal bond, because in times of stress and trauma, it's our pets that come to us. I mean, sitting here on the back of my chair is my cat Rudy, who actually hails from the island of St. Croix in the Virgin Islands, where I have a transport program. I'm here in Michigan, and he's here all the time. Every time I'm on a Zoom video, he's here. So, you know, they're with us all the time. They aid us in healing and recovery. When I look at kids and pets naturally go together. And so this safety program maintains that human-animal bond by co-sheltering people and their pets. It reduces a barrier to safety. And because I am a prosecutor at the end of the day, this provides a solution to link crimes and allows everyone to remain safe so that the offenders can be held accountable. And so in the safety program, I've outlined 4 steps to implement. There's the pre-decision phase, initial implementation, financial preparation, and welcoming pets. And I'm going to go through them very quickly. In the pre-decision phase, you can consult with the safety program for free. Lots of phone conversations, lots of video tours, even in-person tours to check out the setting, to make sure that you are picking the right housing option. But I always ask shelters to first start asking about pets. When someone calls in seeking help, ask them, do you have pets? How many pets do you have? What is the welfare of your pets? Are they safe? Have they been injured? Can you house them with friends or family? You know, have you delayed getting to safety because of your pets? And it's getting the hotline workers prepared with resources so that they can help with pet safety planning and get the pets in a safe location until they can then take them on site. And so I work with staff to really talk through this to make sure that everybody is on board, because this should never be a program that is born out of the passion of one person, because people get promoted, they leave and go to other work. So this really has to be buy-in from everybody. And it's really garnering support in the community. You know, right now I am working in my community and creating a coalition around this, and we're getting law enforcement, the prosecutors, all the domestic violence agencies and social service agencies on board. So any of the first responders to know about this and to know what to do with pets when they're interacting with anybody who needs to come into shelter. And then in the second phase for initial implementation, the big question is, what type of pets do you want to house? Cats and dogs are the most popular, but do you live in an area where there's a lot of horses or there's a lot of farm animals and livestock? This is something that really has to be taken into account that we can help with. And then how do you want to house them? So the safety program outlines 4 housing options, and I'm going to go through those and show you just briefly what some of the shelters have done. So in housing option number 1, this is where the pets actually go in the room with the family. So this is like you going on vacation with your dog or your cat and you're finding a pet-friendly hotel. There is no cost to setting this up. The setup can be immediate. I have helped some shelters make a decision and that night they took their first pet, because all the policies and all the forms are in the safety startup manual to get them going. This is the greatest amount of comfort for families with pets because they can be with their pet. And when it comes to allergies or fear of pets, this is absolutely controllable. So let me show you what is happening. So in Amsterdam, in the Netherlands, I had a chance to visit this shelter, which is actually a high-rise apartment building. And this is the perfect setup because they have hard floors, which are easy to clean pet dander. They have radiators, so there's no exchange of pet dander in a centralized heating or cooling system. And the mattresses are encased, so dander is not getting into the mattresses. That's how you control allergies. There's a lot of other ways to control allergies. So I talk to the shelters about how never to let this be a hindrance. In Victorville, California, the High Desert Domestic Violence Program took 2 rooms, made them pet friendly, broke through the cement walls and created pet doors, and then attached on the outdoor exercise area for the pets to go into. And since this program started in the summer of 2009, they have not had a single negative interaction with a pet, according to Daryl Evie, who works at that shelter and has been a longtime contact of mine. And then in Caldwell, Idaho, you can see their setup. Again, hard floors. But even if a room has carpet, that can still handle any sort of allergies between pets. And I talked to the shelters about having rooms that are pet friendly and other rooms that are off limits to pets. So there's a lot of ways to get beyond this. The second option is to create an indoor kennel. And this can be as low as a couple of $100s. It can even be free, because I'm a big fan of asking for free stuff. You know, go get free stuff. Communities love this. It may take a couple of days to set this up. There is some comfort for the family because their beloved pet is still physically within the shelter, just maybe down the hallway. And so this is a way to control allergies or any other residents or staff that have fear of pets. And so this is what Interval House in Ottawa, Canada did. I mean, they created a beautiful space where families can go and sit and play and have comfort with their pets. In Colorado, the Mountain Peace Shelter, they took their garage and they split it in half One half has the dog kennels, and the other half has a space for cats and other small pets. Fort Walton Beach, Florida, they've done a couple of different things. They have an outdoor setting, but they also took a room, emptied it out, and then reconfigured it to have an indoor kennel where families can go and spend time with their pets. And here in Michigan, in Saginaw, the Underground Railroad took their basement and put dog kennels in it, and then created doggy doors, and then outdoor secured fencing for the dogs to go in and out and get fresh air. The third option is to create an outdoor kennel. Now, again, depending on your community and if you're really good at asking for free stuff, this could be free, or it could be potentially thousands of dollars, or it could be a multi-year, multi-million-dollar capital campaign if you live in a big jurisdiction like Las Vegas. So it could take several months or years to set up. This is the least amount of comfort for the family with the pet, because the pets are technically not even within the shelter, they are in the backyard. But if the big barrier is concerns about allergies or fear of pets, this eliminates that barrier. And so Quigley House in Florida, they have the outdoor kennels for the dogs, and then they have a cat house where cats, rabbits, other small animals are in a secured outdoor animal shelter. Greenhouse 17 built an animal shelter on their property, and they have individual rooms for the pets where the families can actually go in and spend quality time with them. Rosebrook Shelter built their outdoor shelter because that beautiful dog that you see on the screen, Hank, was sadly being beaten with a hammer by the abuser, and his mom was being beaten by a hammer. The abuser threw both of them out a second-story window, and she had enough wherewithal and courage to drag herself and Hank to the Rosebrook shelter, who at that time was not set up to take pets, but they took him in, and then they built this in honor of that dog, because that dog saved his mom's life so that she could get them out of there. And this is what it looks like. And what I love is that every shelter does something different. These do not have to be luxurious. They just need to be safe and comfortable, because these pets just really want to be with their people. The Aware Shelter in Hermitage, Pennsylvania. This is a very popular option where sheds are being built or reconfigured, and they are attaching the outdoor play area directly to it. And that's also providing safety for any children that may be going outside in the backyard. And Hill County Crisis Council, they actually bought this pre-engineered metal building from a company called Lone Star Structures, and it has 7 dog kennels. What I love is that the wire fencing it can't be chewed through, because some dogs just like to go to town and chew the fencing. So they've done a really good job with this, and it's insulated with air conditioning and heating, and it provides them a secure location as well as an outdoor space for fresh air. And then the last model is transitional housing. Not every shelter has transitional housing, but this is the next step in housing when a family or an individual is ready to leave the emergency shelter. And this is where pets really need to be considered, because if there is a break in the continuum of care, that person could have no other choice but to go back into the abusive home and just cross their fingers that everything is going to be different, which it often is not. So the cost of this can vary because it depends on rental housing. That is often what transitional housing is. So it's really going to depend on the landlord. It's going to provide the greatest amount of comfort because it still keeps the person and their pet together. And just like housing within the shelter, you can control the allergies. And so the big issues that I'm helping shelters with, and this is a focus of the safety program right now, is to really help with more pet-friendly transitional housing. The issues are some shelters don't even have transitional housing programs, or they can't find affordable housing. And if they can, they have to get the consent of the landlord. Sometimes the pet deposits are outrageously expensive, or pet damage can be expensive. So the safety program is working with shelters to find solutions, to find pet-friendly rentals. You know, the Rose Brook shelter that I talked about, they assist their residents in finding pet-friendly housing and paying transitional housing rent for up to a year. You know, Mitchell County Safe Space in Spruce Pine, North Carolina, they help with pet deposits, and they're using HUD funds for that. The YWCA of Clark County and Port Townsend, Washington helps with pet deposits. Quinata in Quincy, Illinois, they don't have a transitional housing program, but they are using HUD money to pay up to 3 months of rent and utility costs. So shelters are finding really creative ways to help with this. But the one thing that I recommend is that a shelter provide a pet reference letter to a landlord to talk about how the pet was, you know, a really good resident and didn't damage anything and was quiet. And that can really help get them into a transitional housing program that's based on a rental. Now, in the safety program, we have 4 very important policies. And I have found over the years that when shelters follow these, they have successful, sustainable programs. And the first is to find an animal partner. It could be an animal shelter or an animal rescue. And, you know, formalize a relationship in a memorandum of understanding so that if a person needs to come into domestic violence sheltering, but they have an excessive number of pets, the animal partner is there to help with housing. Or if there are noisy pets that are disturbing the residents at the domestic violence shelter, the animal partner is there. Or large and exotic animals. You know, I cannot tell you how many calls I've gotten about someone needing shelter with their pot-bellied pig or a 4-foot-long iguana named Fred. That was a real call that I got. So, you know, with large or exotic animals or horses or cows or sheep or goats. And the animal partner is also there to help with aggressive or stressed pets, because there is a fine line between that. And we never ask a domestic violence shelter to become an animal expert or to actually, you know, become an animal shelter. That's not what this is about. This is about keeping people and their pets together. We also recommend that the domestic violence shelter partner with a veterinarian, because if someone is coming into shelter in the middle of the night and they have an animal that's been hurt, that is not the time to go looking for a veterinarian. Veterinarians love this program, and a lot of them provide free services. We also recommend that the domestic violence shelter partner with a homeless agency, an agency that is working with and looking for people experiencing homelessness, because there are a number of domestic violence survivors who could not get into transitional housing with their pets, and they may start experiencing homelessness. So this is a way of identifying them and helping them. But one of the most important policies is that the family cares for their pets. There are times when, you know, a domestic violence survivor may not be in a position to care for their pet. They have to care for themselves, but most want to be with their pets. And having that normalcy of walking the dog and cleaning the litter box and brushing the cat, that normalcy can start helping with the healing process. With the families caring for the pets, this is not for the domestic violence shelter to take on that task, because they're busy enough as it is. And with the families caring for the pets, we ask them to not let anyone else have contact with their pet. So they're not walking the dog through the shelter to go outside and letting all the kids and all the other residents pet their dog, because that's when a bite or a scratch can happen. So in working with insurance companies, they like these policies, especially the last one, and are more likely to extend the insurance to cover pets as long as these are being followed. And then in the manual, I go through legal issues for shelters to look at. You know, the manual really outlines all the things to think about, such as confidentiality of pets when maybe they need to move to the animal shelter partner or a vet clinic. You know, so it's looking at your state confidentiality laws. You know, is the survivor coming in with a court order or a pet protection order that covers the pet? What if the abuser shows up demanding custody and ownership? You know, how do you handle insurance and liability when you have pets on site? And then it's also looking in your community, your jurisdiction, to see, do you need any special permits or a kennel license? Now, the next phase is the financial preparation phase. And there's a whole host of things to think about, but just briefly, we talk with the shelters about how are you going to fund your setup. I'm going to show you some fundraising options and some grant options that are coming up. But you need the money to get set up for most of the phases. You're going to need some basic supplies: cat food, dog food, cat litter, leashes. Do you need an outdoor area? Do you need the money to set that up? Do you need security cameras and, you know, security locks for any sort of outdoor housing? What about veterinary care? Some of the survivors coming in with pets that have been injured, they may not have the money. So keeping a fund of money for veterinary care can be very helpful. You know, how are you going to handle the duration of, you know, stay in the shelter? You know, what happens if pet-friendly housing is not available in the next phase? In the safety startup manual, there are forms where the domestic violence shelter can still continue to care for the animal, or the animal shelter partner can, while pet-friendly transitional housing is being found. And then you need to think about insurance. So when it comes to fundraising, I love what the shelters have done, because the shelters who engage a community through public awareness have sustainability. And so I always encourage them to coordinate with their animal partner, to go into community groups such as the Kiwanis Club, the Rotary Club, the Lions Club, Zonta Club, go into churches, go into schools, have donation canisters around town. I mean, you know this. People who love animals love to donate. And, you know, this is such an innovative concept, and there's so many communities who need a pet-friendly shelter. They love to support it. So the photos that you see below, the one with the plaques is in Harbor House in Orlando, Florida, because if you're like me, we love to memorialize our pets. And this is a great fundraiser for them, where companies can put their logo on a plaque, but they can also put their pets. And then the photo on the right, Naples, Florida shelter takes this tree with butterfly ornaments made by the shelter kids, and it goes around town and it just asks for specific donations. So there's really easy things that can be done, and the safety program helps you brainstorm these sustainable fundraising options. And then there's a lot of grant options out there. Oh my goodness. The one thing that I tell the shelters is, unless you are going for a really expensive housing setup, the money is there. The money is not the problem. There's a lot of great funds out there with wonderful organizations who are really chipping in. And I know you're going to hear from Bryna in just a couple of minutes, talk about their great work. And then the last phase is the welcoming of the pets phase. And so in the manual, I outline how to bring the pets in during the intake phase, how to do an assessment. Again, having the pet supplies there, talking to the residents about proper care of their pets while the pets are in shelter, providing enrichment for the pets, and a whole host of things, you know, including what if the domestic violence survivor leaves the shelter and they leave their pet behind? That's all covered in the manual. And the manual even goes into supportive programs because I also have a health and wellness business. So there's just a lot of additional things that shelters can do, as well as bring the pets into care. So I only have a couple of minutes left, and I want to end on time. But the safety program has a technical assistance center where we provide help to domestic violence shelters at no cost at any time. I am helping shelters who implemented 13, 14, 15 years ago. So we're always here to help. The domestic violence shelters can get the Safety Startup Manual at no cost, and it has all the forms that they need, including policies and procedures from other shelters who have been so generous in offering that up. And then I just get testimonials like this, where the shelters realize that they are providing such a life-saving option. So if you have any questions, feel free to email me. You can check out the safety program website. You can join the Facebook page or our LinkedIn page. And if you have questions, just feel free to message me directly. And, you know, I'm super happy to help out. And if you have a domestic violence shelter in your community that would like to have a conversation, definitely message me. We will get that on the calendar. All right. That's it for my presentation. And I think I ended with 2 minutes to spare. That is pretty rare for me. Trust me, for me, that is incredibly rare.
Well, that was fantastic. Thank you so much, Allie. I see quite a few questions in the chat. We're going to hold the questions till the end, but definitely, and we're, you know, saving all of the questions as well. So please keep them coming into the chat and we'll come back. The next folks that we're talking to are, as Allie mentioned, Dr. Bryna Donnelly, who's the Vice President of Pet Programs for GreaterGood Charities. She founded Rescue Rebuild, which is an animal shelter renovation program. And she works with volunteers of all ages to enrich the lives of animals and their caretakers. Her team has renovated over 160 shelters worldwide and consulted with countless other groups to help keep pets and people safe. And presenting with her is Katie Campbell, the Director of Collaboration and Outreach for RedRover. Katie's worked with nonprofits for more than 10 years. She's worked with diverse communities across racial, ethnic, and economic lines in positions ranging from frontline service to management roles. She's worked with survivors of domestic violence, as well as other individuals at risk, and with many nonprofits serving these communities. Katie is a firm believer that more can be accomplished when organizations work together and with the community rather than in silos. So take it away, Bryna and Katie.
Awesome. Well, let me get to the 8 million things open on my screen. Sorry, guys. Multitasking on a crazier level than I normally am. Katie, you want to jump in and start this off, or you want me to go right for it?
You know, how about I get us started, because I want to give you a good amount of time to talk about and show some fun photos. So, you know, a few of the things that we'll cover today, you see up on the screen now. And so I'm just going to caution everybody and say that this is part of a 7.5, 8 hour training that we give to folks throughout the country. And we actually went international last month with a couple of folks joining us, really designed to help walk folks through this entire process. And so we have a lot of slides in here. We'll kind of move through some of them quickly, but we want to make sure that you have them, you have the information. We're absolutely happy to share these with you later. So just kind of that disclaimer before we get started. We'll move through some stuff pretty quickly. I'm totally stoked to be here, and I know Bryna is too. It's just been fascinating to meet so many people who want to take on this kind of work and are really interested in co-sheltering. And you know what I think is even more exciting is to know that there's so much support out there for folks, you know, with Allie and Danielle and Colleen. And then, you know, Allie mentioned like the new fundraising that's coming in. Is just really exciting. I think it's an exciting time and a really supportive time for us to be coming together and talking about this kind of work. So without further ado, let's talk a little bit about collaboration. So, oh wait, no, let's do intros really quick. You want to talk about GreaterGood?
I know. I feel like after Anne's bios, we don't need much, but we should actually talk about our organizations, right?
Sure.
So I just wanted, since we have such a cool gamish of people, I mean, that poll yesterday where it showed how many animal welfare people were here is in addition to all the cool human service organizations that are hanging out with us today. So I just wanted to let you know that as an umbrella group, GreaterGood Charities, our broad mission is people, pets, and the planet. And I just kind of highlighted some of our stats for you just so you could see. But what I really wanted to drive home is that whether you're an animal shelter, whether you're a domestic violence shelter, a homeless shelter, you're from a coalition, you're from any other group representing that wants to get involved, we have so many grants and different opportunities, whether it's backpacks given out for people experiencing homelessness, including pet packs that go with it, whether it's just straight up grants, emergency medical funds. Boy, is there something for everyone. So go check out our GreaterGood Charities website. It's just greatergood.org, and you will see some of the awesome opportunities that we have for you. Our program in general that we'll talk a little bit about during the fundraising section and what Rescue Rebuild actually does. The funding is great, but the overall consulting piece is what's really exciting because we can't build everywhere. And yes, I did say build, because in addition to funding, sadly, when you get a Rescue Rebuild grant, you get stuck with definitely me, but maybe also Katie Campbell, because we also partner on not only the consulting, but a lot of the building efforts. So we will roll up to your shelter, whether it's an animal shelter, a domestic violence shelter, or a homeless shelter, with that crazy tool truck that you see here. That's our rig that we pull up to your shelter and actually do the work. So we have, like the bio said, we've done over 160 projects. We've been in every state other than Alaska and Hawaii, and always look forward to expanding into different areas. So with that, I will give you over to Katie. She can tell you about RedRover.
Awesome. And then one quick request, Bryn, can you make the presentation full screen?
Oh yeah, sure. Sorry. Let me put my glasses on so I can actually see what that is. Yeah.
Thank you. So I'll kind of slide through this one pretty quickly. These are our three main programs. The one on the left, Responders Program, is our volunteer program. So we train volunteers throughout the US and Canada. On the right, you'll see our Readers Program. So it's really all about teaching kids about kindness, compassion, and empathy. It's okay, you can stay there. Kindness, compassion, and empathy through books. And then in the middle, you would have seen our RedRover Relief Program. And so this is where our domestic violence work really falls. So Bryna, if you go up to the three dots on the top left, and then hit the one on the right, it should be green. And it'll have the two arrows usually.
It does not. I know it looks really different right now than we normally do during our online. Yeah,
it should be on the three dots on your PowerPoint slideshow.
All right, let me try. Get your head out of my way. Yeah, it's definitely like not, it's like wanting to be in like this weird thing, like when I was tied to you the other day on our double screens.
Yeah. Oh, see the green? You're up on it. That
This
little
thing?
one.
The dots here.
Yep.
All that takes me to is this. That's what I'm saying. It's
Oh,
weird.
I can't do that. Okay. Sorry about the technical difficulties. We'll figure it out. So underneath our RedRover Relief program, we have our domestic violence work. And so we have something called the safeplaceforpets.org website. So basically it's a directory of organizations throughout the US and Canada that offer assistance to survivors and their pets in some way. So this could be on-site options, it could be off-site. So if housing is taking place at an animal welfare organization or a boarding facility, all you have to do is pop in there. You can search by zip code, city, state, or even Canadian province, and you'll see what resources are available in your area. And then, Bryna, if you can hit the next slide. How RedRover really started our work within the domestic violence world was through our Safe Escape grants. And so we started these back in 2007. And basically what we do with these grants is cover the boarding costs while a survivor is at a domestic violence shelter. So an advocate goes to that website, they can fill out the application online, and our case managers are going to get back within 24 hours, Monday through Friday. They do know, obviously, that these are emergency situations, and so they're certainly going to try and get back.
It's like going nuts, Katie. I'm so sorry.
It's okay. I feel like you owe me some of this, you know?
Yeah, you tortured me the last time we did our online thing, so this is a fair play.
Yeah, it's, it's okay. It's fine. So our case managers definitely try and get back to folks within a couple hours. And I just want to point out, we are Monday through Friday. We are based in Sacramento, California. So it is Pacific Standard Time. So they're generally in the office about 8:30 to 4:30 p.m. And then if you can hit the next button for me.
Oh, that was nice. There we go. I'm letting you share after this.
Just want to point out and share with everybody that since 2007, we've provided more than 40,550, I apologize, that is a typo, safe nights of boarding for about almost 1,400 pets. But as you can imagine, paying for boarding, if you've ever boarded a pet, can be really expensive. And so in 2012, we really kind of started focusing more on our safe housing grants, which I will tell you about here in a little bit. But with that, we realized it wasn't just enough to say, hey, here's some money. We realized that we really needed to kind of support folks and communities in creating these kind of programs. So if you can hit the next slide for me, Bryna. And for us, really creating successful programs, and I know Allie mentioned it, and it was mentioned a lot yesterday, really starts with collaboration. So hit the next slide for me. And then you can go ahead and pull up. There should be a couple little things there. Cool, right there. And so this really forms the core of successful pet programs. It really requires that our human services organizations are asking about pets at intake or when they're safety planning. It really requires that our veterinarians know the signs of animal abuse, of abuse in general, and they know how to respond. And our animal organizations really have to ask about domestic violence, and they have to know and get trained on how to respond in those situations. And when all of you come together and you collaborate and you train each other and you support each other, you have some really amazing and successful programs. And I just wanted to kind of comment on a couple of things. I believe it was Dr. Lem yesterday, said, in response to, I think some folks were kind of having trouble reaching across the aisle and finding that partner across that aisle. And sometimes it really does take finding that champion. If you're an animal welfare organization, it really is finding that domestic violence organization, that person at that organization that is an animal lover or understands the link between human and animal violence, finding the champion, and so vice versa. And, I will tell you, within my work at RedRover, it takes persistence. I know Dr. Lem mentioned, sometimes it's taken years for her to find those champions at those organizations. You're not alone in that. I have had so many cold calls, cold emails, and to no response, or to hear back, we're not interested. So I encourage you to be persistent. You can always call me, and I will nicely hound folks and talk to them and try and get them on board with these kind of programs. And I know Allie said this as well, like, not one of you needs to be the expert in everything. I think that's the most important thing when we talk about collaboration. So Bryna, if you want to hit the next slide. Bryna's really going to drill down on this on-site or co-sheltering piece, so we can skip on through that as well. I just want to highlight some of the reasons, and you can go ahead and bring up that list, Bryna. Highlight some of the reasons of why starting a pet program is really important. When you think about the link between human and animal violence, and you think about the human-animal bond and the role that it can play in healing, it's really kind of it's a no-brainer almost why it's important to start these pet programs. You know, we're eliminating a barrier to safety. We're keeping domestic violence survivors safe. You know, they're not returning because of concerns for a pet. We're reinforcing that human-animal bond, and we're really facilitating healing. So go ahead to the next slide, Bryn. But I think we're probably all here because we're interested in this. But there's challenges, right? There's hurdles, there's things to think through. We'll go quickly through this one, but I just want to say, you know, these are the challenges that we hear most often, and probably we could have maybe 3 more slides of other challenges that we hear. But really, when you think through these things carefully, when you work with your partner organizations, and you do some of the things that Bryna is going to talk about, all of these challenges can be overcome. Let's go to the next slide. And you can bring up the list there. And when you do think about collaborating and who you can reach out to in your community, you know, try and also think outside the box on this. You know, these are just some of the examples of organizations we've heard working with each other to provide these pet programs. And many of them you might not have thought, you know, would want to support a pet program, a co-sheltering program, and a domestic violence shelter. So just a reminder to kind of think outside the box on this. And with that, I believe we're going to start talking some design. So now you control your own destiny now, Bryn.
I know, it's great.
I know.
Like insane over here. My computer switched over to another desktop. I think is half the problem too. It's like now showing another one that you guys can't even see. That's awesome. So Allie had gone through a lot of the different structures and different things that she's recommended over the course of her awesome career. And so a lot of this is going to be very similar. There are only so many ways you can house a pet. And so whether you're doing it in individual living units, and that can mean not just this is a room with some bunk beds like we would see in a traditional domestic violence shelter, but it can also incorporate the transitional living apartment units, slightly different group housing units. There's a lot of different cool ways that people are finding solutions to help people in crisis. And now we just want to roll in the pets to that. So the pet plan, number one, is definitely, I would say, our favorite way to go. As Katie alluded to, we do a 7.5, 8 hour day where we walk people through a lot of these different plans and the importance of collaboration, the importance of the human animal bond. And when I say this is our favorite way to go, it is hands down because of that human animal bond. Being able to have that excellent resource of fuzz at the end of the day. Katie is cringing right now because she had basically an emotional support fish. Was that in college, Katie? You poor thing.
Yes, Bryn, it was.
I just have to pick on her a little bit because I have to have the fur. But hands down, this is our favorite way to go, whether it's the human animal bond or also one of the huge upsides of this being the lessening of the burden of care. And so when we dive into what does Pet Plan 1 actually entail, the biggest complaint, the barriers that Katie mentioned for us is allergies. We get a lot of people concerned about that. And so the best thing you can do, get rid of your carpeting and put in a product that is going to be really beneficial to keeping clean, removing allergens. And as we very probably ungraciously state, when you think of what a dog can do, a rambunctious, even the worst behaved dog you can ever imagine in your mind, I always like to remind our human services shelters that is nothing compared to what 2 10-year-old boys can do in some of your rooms and spaces. So we always like to point out that domestic violence shelters, homeless shelters, you already have the tools. You're already housing families. You're already dealing with those rambunctious 10-year-old boys and girls. So adding a dog, adding a kitty, adding a guinea pig, or a fish, Katie, it really doesn't add that much to your burden of what you need to build to preserve your space. Carpeting is just one. When you do switch over to what do pets specifically need, When a pet comes into shelter, it's either used to living on the street if you were dealing with somebody who had maybe been experiencing more of an acute homelessness. But in the cases of domestic violence, most frequently these pets are coming out of a living situation, which means they're already trained to be going to the bathroom outside. And what we want to do when we're preserving this family unit is also preserve its way of life. So you want to find out when your pets come in, how have they been spending their days? We talk about that kind of process and how you set up your pet programs a lot more in our full day course. But for here, the best thing I can say is get a pet door. If you can have each room with its own pet relief area, that's hands down the easiest on your staff, the easiest on your residents, and the best thing for your pups. These doors are lockable, so if you have cats in there, super easy to just lock that pet door, keep the kitties in if that's what you wish. But you can build catios too. Those are super cute, and another way to get that kitty some fresh air and some enrichment. When we talk about enrichment, a lot of the participants here we noticed were from animal shelters. So enrichment is nothing new for you. But when we think of people coming in to conferences like this from human service shelters, enrichment's one of those kind of kitschy animal welfare terms that we throw around a lot. But it basically means find something for your animals to do. And also really design your spaces based on your pet's behavior. So if you're going to be taking cats in, make sure they have high places to go to get away from, whether it's the kids in their little tiny living space, whether it's just to get that de-stress time. You want to give them high spots, hiding places, cubbies, otherwise they're going to end up under your beds. For dogs, it's really all about soothing them and getting them exercise. So whether you're talking indoor enrichment, which would be your beds, your toys, your soothing music, cleaning products that have a very pleasing and soothing scent, but also, like I say there, the toys. So as far as what an in-room situation is going to do for your staff, it's hands down the easiest. But that being said, we do want to talk about that you want to make sure that there is somebody on your staff who's actually kind of overseeing all of your pets. And whether that's just making sure that its owner came home last night, or whether it's just ensuring that the owner was able to get out of bed. We hear from a lot of our domestic violence partners that the first few days in shelter can be it's just a decompression time where that person may need to just really kind of chill out and have some detox time. So is the pet getting out? Is the pet being cared for the way it should be? Have a staff member kind of overseeing that. Another interesting thing that we heard from one of our shelters, and we didn't talk about it today, which we normally do, is when you think of the link between human violence, animal violence, and what that really looks like, one of our shelters pointed out that many of their children coming into shelter that had been exposed to domestic violence were kind of perpetrating that violence forward. And so since they have so little control over anything in their lives, this was something that they were seeing pretty frequently, where the kids were acting out, having these behaviors. And so for the pet safety, they were concerned with having it in room, and they actually wanted a space outside of room. Another downside of them being in room that we've heard from our shelters is noise complaints. The easiest way that we can suggest to mitigate that is when you're actually thinking about where do you want to put your pets. So whether it's you're going to set aside these 5 rooms that are pet friendly, or whether you're just going to set aside rooms that are not pet friendly, whatever's best for you, think of your flow of traffic. So you don't want to put a dog next to a common area where every single person in the shelter is going to be walking by their room, which is going to cause them to be curious and just want to say hi or be protective and want to say go away. Dogs have things to say just like we do. So watch your flow, make sure they're not near bathrooms, make sure they're not near common areas. If you can put them near an exit door where they can just cruise right out the door to go outside and spend time out there or go to the bathroom, that is obviously the best. Allergies wise, in addition to stripping out old carpeting and things like that. I have this funny picture up here of the old hardwood floors. In the Northeast, we see a lot of our domestic violence shelters in old homes that have been converted into shelter. And though they have hardwood floors, they more often than not look like that. So if your hardwood floors look like that underneath your carpet or just in general, consider adding tile, or there's a very cool product called LVT, which is just basically like a clickable, absolutely waterproof, fabulous product that can go over the top of anything like that. So check that out. Super good for the allergies. In addition, when you're living in these tiny living situations like small old Victorian homes that have been converted into shelters, for the rooms that you would want to make completely pet-free, consider one of those small portable HEPA filters or filtration systems. They kind of look like a roll-around dehumidifier. Those are really inexpensive. You can get them for under $300. I think we saw some that were under $200. Very easy to move around your shelter as needed. So consider that for sure. So kind of an addendum to the individual living unit is when we're in homeless shelters, communal situations. We don't very often see that in DV. And since this breakout is really more geared towards domestic violence pet programs, I'm going to kind of cruise through, but suffice to say, it's interesting. You definitely have to be creative, whether it's bunk beds or bedrolls on the floor or cots, all in this communal area. We're happy to walk you through that. Come check out our Don't Forget the Pets workshop, and we'll talk much more about it, but it is a fun system to try to design for. One of the other models, our Pet Plan 3, is super interesting. We do a lot of consulting where we'll show up and look at your shelter, or in this day of COVID, we send you a scanner, have you scan around your shelter, you send us back pictures. Got to be creative these days, but we'll find a space. So reach out to us and show us your shelter, whether it's FaceTime, whether it's on a scanner, and we'll find a space. The funny example I gave here was a garage. We weren't even at the shelter to look at their garage. They had built this whole beautiful pet annex, but it only was 2 rooms. And we were like, what's that over there? And it was a garage they were using to house goods for a thrift store that they were using to fundraise, not to steal Katie's fundraising thunder, but fundraising. And so this was just a really cool garage space. We ended up dividing it in half, left them half. Thought that was generous of us, Katie, to leave them at least half their storage. And then the other half we turned into some really nice indoor-outdoor kennels, because again, we didn't want to unhouse train our dogs. So the dogs were able to go out into individual pet relief areas, had a very nice, safe visual barrier between each of the pups so that they were in no danger from each other if that ended up ever being a problem. And then one of the other things that we see when you've pulled the pet out of the individual living unit and you've taken them away from being constantly with their pet owner, you really do need to provide a space where they can go and hang out and spend that quality time to preserve that human animal bond. So one of the things we recommend are these cool little living rooms. Now this living room is a little bit fancy. Katie would call it the Maserati of living rooms, though it's not. It's still in a garage. Let's keep that in mind. But it has the 3 main components that are so important to preserving that fun space. It's got the couch. You can't even see the blanket there, but it's probably got a blanket, and it has a TV so that we can really encourage more than just go out, scratch their head, throw a ball, go back to your room. We want the quality time. So as with every method, it has its ups and downs. It's certainly less expensive than having to create a whole new kenneling structure, but definitely more expensive than ripping up some carpeting and throwing down some tile. So halfway between. It is usually easier, again, when we're thinking about kid safety and pet safety. There is an easier kind of oversight when you have them out of the individual rooms. You know what's going on and that the pet is being cared for. We would still strongly suggest that the onus of that pet care go to the pet parent. But again, good to have somebody at your shelter who is kind of overseeing that care and making sure that it's being done up to best practices and standards. Lower on the human animal bond. So we're just going to make a living room. We've solved that problem. In addition to having the living room space, consider having a play yard. So that's what this picture is here. This is a little bit of a bigger one. We've created ones that are as small as 4 feet wide by 20 feet long, so you can just throw a ball. But a happy dog is going to be much more probable if you are giving it room to exercise. So that kind of speaks to that outdoor enrichment. One of the things that we are always concerned with when we take the pets out of the room, though, is the out of sight, out of mind. So we include it here just because we want you to really, really remember somebody needs to be kind of overseeing these pet programs when you've pulled the pets out of the room. Just have that advocate at your shelter. We have the bottom upside, which is kind of a strange place to set that there, but it's to remind us that some of the organizations that we've worked with have actually contracted or written an MOU with an outside animal welfare organization, where that animal welfare organization either sends trained, obviously trained in DV, not just in animal welfare, but sends over trained volunteers or actually staff of the animal welfare organization to kind of provide that oversight. Sojourner is probably one of our best examples of that in Phoenix, Arizona. They're an amazing group, but they contract out their care. Okay, so back to Katie's Maseratis. So the Maserati of pet plans would definitely be, let's just install a whole new building or structure for you. And you can divide that up in a lot of ways. It could be a kennel building, kind of like that garage where the dogs have to stay in a kennel. It can be a room that is wide open for a colony cat style living existence. Or it can be what we call the pet retreat kind of style, where we dropped 2 sheds here. They were prefabricated sheds, really easy. And then we just turned each one into 2 rooms, divided them in half. So we ended up with 4 rooms total, all of them looking like this bottom situation here, where you have your basics again. You're back to, you got a couch, you got a blanket, you've got a TV. But more importantly than that, you have now put dogs and cats. We got a cute little cat bridge over there for the kitties. You cannot put animals in a shed, whether you're in Wisconsin and it's going to be too cold, or whether you're in Florida and it's going to be too hot. Even here in Philly, it would be too hot in a shed. So you've got to install some sort of heating cooling system. You can make that as simple as can be. You'll see this little tiny white box here is actually a split air system. So it's just a standalone little heating and air conditioning system that can be installed relatively inexpensively. There's other styles like the ones we see in hotel rooms when once upon a time we were traveling. But lots of ways to do it, but you definitely need to heat and cool these spaces. All right, the ups and downs here, pretty much the same as what we saw with when you're pulling the pets out of the room in the last pet plan. You just have a little bit more flexibility in your design. That to me is definitely an upside, because you can decide where on your property it's going to be, how you want to house the animals. It's really just a very, very simple way to create your optimal design. Clearly, it is going to be the more expensive of the designs. As with all construction projects, depending on how you're going to be facilitating, it might take a little longer to get accomplished, but still pretty simple. And then the others, out of sight, out of mind, noise complaints, same as the last pet plan. So some of the other things that you want to think about, we call them kind of our common design elements. Whether the pets are in room, whether they're in a kennel, whatever you're doing, you need to have options. So whether it's you need to have the optional play yard, whether it's you want to create doggy daycare kennels, be creative. You really get a lot of opportunity to be creative. Sometimes we're putting these in basements. That's what you're seeing here. Sometimes we're just throwing them off the side of a building. Keep them safe though. Make sure you have that visual barrier for pet to pet, and then also keeping the little kid fingers out of them. You really need to watch your flow of traffic. Kids and dogs really are like chocolate and peanut butter. So keep that in mind when you're designing. And then one of Katie's favorite soapbox items is the planning for storage needs. You definitely, it's a field of dreams. If you build it, they will come. Once your community finds out that you're housing pets at your domestic violence shelter and serving both people and pets in your community, you will have a lot of donations to contend with. So you definitely want to consider that. Another big common element is your intake. So I come from animal welfare. So when I first was made aware of the amount of paperwork that people have to fill out when they come into human service shelters, I about fell over. It is a bit staggering. And so while you're intaking people into either a homeless shelter or a DV in this case, you need some place to put your cats and dogs. So I didn't show, this is very speciesist of me, Katie. I didn't even cram in here a cat situation, but you can buy kind of a 3-tier cage. A lot of people call them ferret cages, but you can have a ferret cage in one of your intake counselor's offices. You can have a kennel outside. You can just do this really simply with a dog crate. It's really, really easy to provide something, but you do need to provide some option. If you want to go Maserati again, this was a doggy credenza that we were asked to put together for a shelter that had that donated. I think it's beautiful. I need one in my home, but they are not cheap. So since this is a DV thing, Katie, I think I'm going to kind of cruise through this, but since there's so many animal people in this conference, if you're interested in some of our recommendations for building temp care programs at animal shelters, please join us. We have lots of good words of wisdom, but for you guys, if you're here, just remember security, security, security. That's your big concern when you're dealing with pets that are coming out of a domestic violence situation. Okay, for the legal side of things, and legal, Allie is our resident lawyer. We are not the lawyers, and we don't mean that kind of legal side. We mean more the legal to build and design things side. And so before you even get started, you want to pick up the phone and get a hold of your zoning department and find out what's the deal in your specific area. Every area is different. You want to check out where your zoning historic district restrictions are. If you are housing children by themselves in a transitional housing program like that, check with child services. Some areas have very specific rules about kids and pets. Always want to be careful. And then as far as like just the actual planning, Katie will talk about it a lot when she does protocols in our Don't Forget the Pets training seminar, but you really want to decide which of your pet plan strategies is going to work with your staffing and how many animals you'll house. We usually assume that for every person who comes into shelter, that about 10% of them will be pet parents. That is a huge overgeneralization. We have a lot of Coloradans here with us. Denver, the last time we spoke to them, they were estimating about 30% of the people that are seeking a service, a human service, are pet owners. So know your community and know your demographics for sure. All right. And then if you can't have us come and consult for you, pick up the phone, call a contractor and a handyman, because they're definitely, when you're going to drop a new building or install a new space, find out what's the most economical way that you can do this. All right, Katie, what else we've got?
Awesome. Yeah, let's go to the next slide, because I think we have about 6 minutes left, and I definitely want to leave some time to talk about like our training workshop and some exciting stuff coming up. And, you know, folks, honestly, we could talk program structure, policies and procedures probably for a full 8 hours. Don't worry, we don't talk about it for 8 hours at the training. But, you know, I think I'll just say that really putting some careful thought into your program structure, putting in place, you know, really good policies and procedures are going to go a really long way in terms of making sure you get that insurance cover and making sure you're covering yourself from that perspective. And also, you know, I heard a couple of folks yesterday had chatted that they were having trouble getting staff buy-in, even I think from their own organizations. And, you know, I'll tell you from my own personal human services perspective, you know, if my leadership had told me that we were going to start a brand new program, I would have been a little fearful. But I think, you know, showing your staff and everybody at your organization that you're putting really careful thought into all of these things and what your program is going to look like, you know, on a day-to-day basis is really going to help with some of that staff buy-in or getting your board on board with the pet program. I do want to point out evaluation here, just because that's going to play it's going to play a really important role in terms of fundraising. So in the interest of time, let's skip past this slide. We're also going to skip past this slide just because we really are focusing on domestic violence, but just know that in the workshop, we really do talk about policies and procedures when folks are housing at animal shelters as well. So let's skip on through. because I think we should talk about money, because all of these ideas are great, but if you don't have the money to pay for it, it doesn't really do you any good. So here's the good news, folks, especially for our domestic violence shelter folks. This is a real benefit for you. And Bryn kind of already mentioned it a little bit. One of the first reasons, go ahead, Bryn, hit that. One of the first benefits is the cute factor. So let's face it, kitties and puppies and dogs and cats and fish and hamsters, they're cute and people like to see cute things. And so obviously within domestic violence, we have to be careful of confidentiality and safety. So we're not going to share specifics about a story. We're not necessarily going to share photos of our survivor and their pet, but when you can safely share that story by changing location and names and whatever you need to do, and you pair that with a really cute photo, it's a gold mine. Folks, you're going to be reaching a new donor demographic. So go ahead and hit the next little bit there, Bryn. So Americans spend $70 billion on their pets each year. So Human Services Domestic Violence Shelter folks, there may be animal lovers who did not support your program before because they didn't support human services efforts, but now you're going to educate them on the link, and you're going to tell them that, you know, people and pets are experiencing crises and they need help. So this really is a new donor demographic for you. Go ahead and hit the next slide, Bryn. And we really, really encourage you to think outside the box. Yes, those are cats in boxes. And you went way too fast.
I did.
I think you got excited and you hit next.
No, the kitties, like the kitties in the box, they scare me.
I know. It's incredibly cute. I don't know where this photo came from. I think I got it from Google. But seriously, guys, folks, think outside the box on this. You would be surprised at who wants to collaborate with you and who wants to fundraise with you. But let's talk about our grant. So go ahead and flip to the next one. You want to talk about yours first, actually?
Sure. I was going to say I'm here, right?
Yeah.
So ours are very, very simple. You just go to rescuerebuild.org. I know the link down there is longer, but literally you will find us at just rescuerebuild.org. We are open enrollment, so you can apply any time of year. We typically do anywhere from 6 to 15 or even more builds per year. We do some in partnership with RedRover, and Katie will talk about that. But the other thing is we are going to have our links for some of our other fun things. So definitely go check it out.
Definitely. And then you can go ahead and pull up all those bullets. So RedRover has our safe housing grants. These are up to $20,000. We do accept those twice every year, so May 15th and October 15th. We also have grants that go directly to the animal shelters. So if they want to create space at their locations, we have grants of up to $20,000 for that. You can get all of that information at redrover.org/safe housing. Pull up, go ahead and hit. There you go. We've given out 138 grants at this point for over $1.5 million. And super fast, I want to get to the next slide. I know, it's like so fast. I'm very sorry. Our next training workshop, go ahead and hit the next. Cool. We have our next workshop scheduled for May 26th and 27th. It's free, it's virtual. You can sign up there at that link. Once we're done, I'll drop that link in again as well. And then Bryn, you've got one more slide. We have, I don't know, maybe 30 seconds.
5 seconds. Okay. So in addition to the training workshop, we are going to be offering a free coaching program, which is one-on-one consultation, which will include budgets, construction renderings, policies and procedures, and really us just walking you all the way through this. That is all going to be in conjunction with the rollout of our website, which will happen on April 1st. And in addition to that, we're going to have an expert forum, or as Katie likes to call it, the forum.
Thank you for saying that, Bryn.
And I think that is it, Anne. Sorry.
No, that's perfect. That's great. That was hysterical, the firm. I have one quick question I have to ask. I know people are going to get mad because we have to move on. What kind of a fish was Pinky?
Oh my gosh.
All right, never mind. That's
on the
too
spot.
And it's a fish. She was
okay,
like,
got it. Thanks, you guys. That was such a great presentation. So much great information. So our final presentation Features Danielle Emery, Lina Cohen, and Colleen Parker of Urban Resource Institute. PALS Director Danielle Emery, Supervisor Lina Cohen, and Training and TA Coordinator Colleen Parker have extensive lived and work experience in social work, animal welfare, and client services, which brought them each to URI, where they are proud to be part of the innovative PALS program and to promote co-living and resources for DV survivors with pets across the nation. They and the entire PALS team are committed to providing client-centered services that encourage resiliency and healing among the PALS residents, human and animal both, in URI shelter. Their talk is titled Beyond Survival, How PALS and Co-Living Help Recovering Families Thrive. Take it away.
Thank you, Anne. Good afternoon, everyone. I am Danielle Emery. I am the director of the PALS program, and I have my two colleagues here with me, Lina and Colleen, who will just introduce themselves very quickly.
Hi, everybody. I'm Lina Cohen. I'm the PALS supervisor on the team. And Colleen, where are you?
Hi, I am Colleen Parker. I am the PALS Technical Assistance and Training Coordinator.
Thank you. So it's awesome to be here with our colleagues, Allie and Bryna and Katie, who we know very well and have worked closely with over the years. We're really here to represent the human services perspective. So we've learned a lot about the need for co-sheltering options for survivors of domestic violence and how both of their organizations can help shelters to think through how to create those programs. But what we really want to talk about is that human services perspective. So after you have a program in operation, just help contextualize our experience in working with survivors with pets to hopefully give you a different perspective. We are also a New York City based organization. So for those of you who are based in cities, I think our experience in working in shelter and with survivors with pets may resonate in a different way. So I'm just going to walk us through a fairly brief PowerPoint to provide some context, and then Lina and Colleen are both going to share some of their perspectives of working in the PALS program and how the program, how the work has impacted them and the survivors that we've worked with. And we should maybe have a couple minutes for Q&A just for our session at the end, but then also we can do questions all together. And just to give a content warning for everyone, we are talking about the lived experiences of survivors of domestic violence. So we will be referencing domestic violence, sexual abuse, mental illness, and other things. So just wanted to give you that heads up. So about URI and PALS, URI is a New York City-based provider that transforms the lives of those impacted by domestic violence and homelessness, with a particular focus on communities of color and other vulnerable populations. We are the largest provider of domestic violence shelter in the United States. We have the capacity to house around 1,200 individuals on any given night. And through all of our programs in DV and homelessness, we serve more than 40,000 individuals a year. So a huge number of people are accessing URI services. And PALS is one of our holistic and innovative programs that empowers survivors to seek safety, heal, and transform their lives by welcoming families into our shelters with their pets. URI was the first, and we're still the only DV shelter provider in New York City to welcome pets. When we first started, Allie was one of the partners that we worked with, and that was in 2012. I'll talk a little bit more about that. But since we have launched in 2013, we've served close to 300 families with up 400 pets. So that's 300 families who have lived in our shelter for a length of time. So Allie touched a little bit on some of these statistics, but oftentimes we're speaking to social work or domestic violence audiences, so people have more of this context, but just want to reinforce the prevalence of domestic violence in our society and what an issue it is. So Allie referenced the common statistic, 10 million people per year are estimated to be impacted or abused, and that comes down to 20 people per minute are physically abused. 1 in 4 women, and 1 in 9 men experience severe physical abuse in their lifetime. And then, so those are the national statistics, but then when we talk about New York City, which is where our program is based, in 2019, the NYPD filed over 110,000 intimate partner incident reports, with an additional 80,000 family violence incident reports. So that's nearly 200,000 domestic violence incident reports that were reported to the police. And for those who know about domestic violence reporting and statistics, know that domestic violence is vastly underreported for a whole variety of reasons that we'll touch on a little bit later. But to me, this statistic is astounding because it breaks down to over 500 incident reports per day in New York City. And then more than 63,000 visits to our family justice centers, which are across 5 boroughs. And that's more than 150 people every day are going into these family justice centers to access resources, to ask for help, to do safety planning, to get case management. So just staggeringly huge numbers. And we have approximately 3,000 domestic violence shelter beds in the entire city. So clearly for people who are in immediate danger and need physical shelter, refuge from an abusive situation, there are not the beds to meet the demand. And so that's just a little context to keep in mind. And so what happens is that we have many domestic violence survivors who are in our Department of Homeless Services homeless shelters for families. So approximately 40% of the families that are entering our DHS homeless shelters in New York City have experienced domestic violence. And a report showed that DV is the #1 cause of homelessness in New York City. So this is people who may have to leave their homes and don't have a safe place to go to. They can't get additional housing. There's no shelter beds available. And so they enter the homeless family system as survivors of domestic violence. So we're here at a co-sheltering conference to talk about the intersection of domestic violence and pets and animal abuse. And so these statistics are some that we commonly share that are shared in any presentation that talks about the link. So we know that survivors have pets. Many American households have pets. Many people experience domestic violence. So we know that survivors have pets. We know that when there's violence in a home, both people and animals are at risk. And we know that pets can be a barrier to seeking safety. So with this intersection of DV and pets and animal abuse in mind, when our CEO, Nathaniel Fields, learned about actually from Allie, about the safety program in 2012, he came back and said, there's nobody doing this in New York City. All these thousands, tens of thousands of people who we have that are experiencing domestic violence, who conceivably, many of them have pets. What are the services that are available? And so, like, to Katie's point, I think he really came back and championed the issue for URI and asked my supervisor, I wasn't with URI at the time, but Jennifer, who is on this presentation as well, to look into this. How could we do this at URI? What would it look like for our clients in our shelters? And we worked with community partners and experts. We were a human services organization. We weren't animal welfare. We didn't have animal welfare expertise or knowledge. So it was working with experts like Allie and RedRover, and then with local community partners, the Mayor's Alliance for New York City Animals, the ASPCA, our animal care centers, all of those local partners to figure out what do we have the capacity to do, where can we start, and begin to meet the needs of our community. So that's both the survivors who are seeking safety, but also the staff and residents that we have in our building that don't have pets. How can we meet all of those needs with a program? So we designed a program launched it back in 2013. Quite small. We started at one shelter location. We only accepted cats. And as our program has grown and we've brought more staff on board, we've been able to grow into something much larger. So as you hear us talking about this work, I think it's hopefully inspiration for that, a nugget was planted in our leadership's mind at a conference, and something started off very small and has grown into something like pretty large and pretty impactful for many, many survivors and their families in New York City. So this both the previous speakers, spoke to some of the services and programmatic aspects of co-sheltering. So I'm not going to get into that really from our perspective, but just to give an overview, like we do a lot of safety planning. We work very closely with the hotline, the local New York City hotline, a lot of community partners, the family justice centers, to make sure that anytime a pet is in the mix for a survivor, that we're available to help safety plan and think of information and referrals for folks. If we can get them into our program, into our shelters, we do co-living, which is that in-unit habitation. So the pet comes into shelter and is in the apartment unit with the family, and the family provides care for the animal. We do provide pet supplies, veterinary referrals, training assistance, humane education for children who live in our shelters, discharge planning, and aftercare, which we are available at any time to talk you through any of those elements and describe the program in greater depth. But what we really wanted to talk about today was, there's the intersection of DV and pets, but then there's the intersection of DV and this very long list of gender. So, we have more women experience domestic violence, but men also experience domestic violence. Are the survivors that you are serving, is there a place for them in your shelter if they are men, if they are trans men or women? Race, systems of oppression, racism, is that causing greater rates of domestic violence against Black women and women of color? Yes, absolutely. Are the reasons that people aren't contacting the criminal justice system, don't want to involve the criminal justice system, that are due to racism and systemic oppression? Yes. Sexuality, if someone is in a gay or lesbian relationship, or any type of relationship, does your program accommodate that? Is that something that they're coming into your shelter, that they're also dealing with that intersection? Homelessness, we touched on that, and this conference illustrates that homelessness is a huge issue for so many survivors. By default, all of the residents in our shelters are homeless. They have left their homes and are living in a shelter environment, and pretty much all of them need to find a new home. Disability, do the services that people are accessing, can they accommodate physical disabilities? Can they accommodate mental health? Not only like your services, but also like the systems that people are interacting with. Can they physically live in shelter buildings or access the other services that they need across your community? Issues of culture, religion, are those issues being addressed in your shelters? If people are seeking services, are they going to be comfortable seeking services like with your organization if there is some religious factor at play? Socioeconomic status, how much has financial abuse impacted the situation? We know that 98% of DV survivors experience some form of financial abuse. Do they have any money? Do they have a job? Do they have access to any funds? Are they coming to shelter with literally the bags, the clothes on their back, and not even a bag or two? And education level, have they attained education? What does getting a job after shelter, what does just access to knowledge, to information, how does all that come into play? So this is really just to illustrate that there are so many intersections of domestic violence that the survivors that we work with are facing. And pets and animal abuse is one of them. But the individuals and families that we work with are complex, and they are unique individuals who also have pets. And I think we see PALS and our work as incorporating services for pets into the array of services that we're offering that factor in all these other pieces of people. And I think the big reveal, there's no slide, but the big reveal is honestly that animals are usually most often not the most challenging barrier or hurdle that our clients are facing. So obviously it's a part of the work that we do, but even us as the pet program, it's not a lot of times the primary focus of the work that we're doing with the clients who we're connected to because they're coming into shelter because of their pets. So we're here at this conference and wanting to challenge human services providers to incorporate pets into their program, seeing relationships with pets as a piece of the clients that you serve. And also to push animal welfare providers to see services for animals as a piece of a plan that is primarily serving people. And like that's really what we try to embody in our program, is this idea that we are a human services agency, we are people focused, and we're helping people who have pets. So now Lina and Colleen are going to take over for a little bit, share how this idea of pets maybe not always being the most significant aspect of our work with our clients or of our program, ironically, plays out for each of them in their individual roles. Lina.
Hi, everybody. So again, I'm Lina Cohen. I'm the PALS supervisor. So before I was supervisor, I was working as coordinator in our shelters. We have 7 shelters right now. We had a few less when I was coming up in the organization, but we keep growing. And so basically what I've seen in my experiences, like why are we talking about these things, is that we want to make sure that people from both sides of the spectrum are thinking about how to tackle these issues, because of course getting animals into shelter is such a huge hurdle and obstacle. We just saw 2 really important good presentations about this topic, and it's so multifaceted. We could have probably sat around and listened for hours and hours about this stuff. But once the people are there in shelter, what are you as an animal service or human service provider then doing to make sure that they have a good time in shelter, to make sure that they're healing in shelter? Because it's not just there's a roof over their head, they're gone. They need to heal. The people and the animal have both been through often a traumatic experience. And so I actually am going to speak a little directly about some of the clients that we've seen and talked to, because this conference is supposed to be about storytelling, and we wanted to incorporate some details. A few of the details have been changed, and I'm not going to be giving any names because of confidentiality. But here, so yes, I am going to talk about 2 different client experiences that I had in my time as a coordinator, working with them and going through a few different aspects of caring for them and helping them heal. One was a gentleman named Mr. D. Mr. D was a survivor of domestic violence in one of our shelters, who had a pet lizard, a bearded dragon, I believe, and a little chihuahua. And so he was actually one of our clients who was pretty quiet and timid in shelter. And this happens, right? Like some people come in and they don't really need that much support or want that much support. And so a lot of his time was spent pretty quiet and self-soothing, and we would check in with them because that is just our policy, to be checking in with our clients and making sure that they are doing well. But we didn't often get a lot of responses. And eventually things came to a head, and we realized that mental health was a big part of why we weren't getting a lot of responses. And so Mr. D was a large, like over 6 foot tall, probably 250-pound gentleman, dark-skinned Hispanic man, who got targeted by the police multiple times on the New York City buses. And so he did not always have a Metro card, and he received at least 1 ticket that we learned about, because when you're in New York City, they have these services where you swipe your Metro card outside of the bus, you get a little ticket, and then police every once in a while will check in and make sure you have that ticket. And so he received a $100 fine ticket for not doing that, and that became like a huge snowballing issue where he eventually shared this information with us. And so my job as the pet coordinator of our program was then to do research and see if we could find somebody to support him. Thankfully, we have a legal services program in our organization, so it wasn't that challenging. But at the same time, if we didn't have that program, I would have had to call around, check in with the case manager, and found support for him. As a person who has an animal welfare background, that is not something that I was expecting, but you have to be thinking on your feet a lot. I think Katie mentioned in their presentation that you have to be flexible, you have to be willing to do the unexpected, and that is true when you're building a new program, but it's also true of managing client issues. The other thing that I wanted to bring up with him was that he eventually decided to rehome one of his lizards, and he did it on his own without our assistance. And that is not the most ideal end point for a pet in one of our programs. But a lot of what we've learned in our program is that we have to meet our clients where they're at. He was having such a rough time. And we were there to support him and make sure that, if he changed his mind, we could go back and get the lizard and go through all of those steps if necessary. But he made the best decision for himself that he could in a given moment, struggling with mental health struggles, not being, and struggling just with like racial identity and all the things that came up for him while in shelter. And so it's just you have to take a super multifaceted look at your clients, at their pets, and treat them as whole and people and creatures that you need to respect fully, to meet them where they're at. I'm getting short on my time, so I'm going to breeze through our next client. So Mrs. C was a client with a child in one of our shelters with 2 cats. She had a history of intense abuse in the family. She was not the survivor, her child was. And so she was more or less what we would call an ideal client. A very lovely person who checked in with us all the time. Not that there is such a title as an ideal client. Everybody deserves good services, but she was super easy to work with. Only ever needed, food supplies that we got to her quickly, and would check in with me and have a chat with me every time we talked. By the end of her stay, as she got near the end of her stay, because our sheltering is temporary, she had to go to the homeless shelter system, which is somewhat less accommodating of pets depending on the situation. Now, Miss C had an ESA letter, and we were under the impression that she would be accepted with her cats, and then she was not. And we realized just how important her cats were to her, because she called us panicking because her daughter started to self-harm because her cats had to be in boarding. So we're very fortunate in being able to work with a lot of different partners. We were able to board the cats for a little while, but it took us literally 2 months to get those cats reunited with that family. And it was very hard to hear about the daughter's situation, and it took us getting her a stronger ESA letter, us calling shelter people, providers, and pushing as much as possible. And when they got accepted, finally, that we got that, yes, we are absolutely accepting them, we are not taking back. Then calling that shelter and being like, but you're sure though, right? Yes, okay, they're coming today, good job. And so that was so essential to her child's mental health and well-being. But the pets weren't the problem. It was not challenging to get them into our shelter. It was challenging to make sure that they were accommodated all the way through. And so I'm going to wrap up my section, but we always want to look at our clients as full people, treat them with respect, and also be willing to tackle their personal issues that come up. Because when the client's needs are addressed, then we know that the pets are going to be as best cared for as possible in any given situation. That's all I have to say. Now I'm going to Colleen.
I'm going to chime in actually. So we actually can hear from Misty. So I'm going to play an audio file. It should work. I think I did the thing. I didn't click share sound. Let me stop share.
Are you guys?
Here we go.
It's really endearing. And as I sit here, coming home from work, exhausted, and I'm watching my little girl playing with her pet, it's really endearing and it makes me really happy. We've lived through some very difficult times. In addition to becoming homeless in 2019, then we've been through the pandemic. But when I see the smile on my daughter's face when she's playing with her pets, and her pets are greeting her after a long day at school or a hard day, it's nice to know that through all of these negative things that have happened, we still remain together as a family, including our pets.
You're up, Colleen.
Thank you so much. I love that recording. I love listening to our clients talk about their pets. It's my favorite thing in the world. I'm Colleen. I am the Technical Assistance and Training Coordinator for the PALS team. And actually, the way that Lina ended off what she was saying is perfect for what I had in mind. Because, thinking about, the sort of needs that our clients in shelter, have that aren't as pet related. I personally am a little more inclined to zoom out because a lot of my role involves, moving between those connections, talking to, animal people about people and people about animals. So I think that something that our clients could really use from all service providers collectively is for us to make a community-wide commitment to providing trauma-informed care across the board, regardless of what our service is. And I know that term's come up a few times so far during this conference, which is awesome. But I want to take the time to share one of my favorite descriptions of trauma-informed care. And it's sort of a combination of statements by the U.S. Substance Abuse and Mental Health Resources Administration and the Trauma-Informed Care Center. So they say that a trauma-informed approach to care acknowledges that service providers need to have a complete picture of a client's life, past to present, in order to provide effective services with a healing orientation. Trauma-informed care shifts the focus from what's wrong with you in this moment to what has happened to you, what has brought you to this point, and where are we hoping to go together. And I just really love that because it highlights why we need to know everything about a client. We need to know why they're with us. We need to know about everything else that's going on with them if we want to provide accurate care, let alone trauma-informed care. So as helping professionals, I think we're all obligated to integrate an understanding of trauma into all of our policies, our procedures, our practices, start from the beginning and weave that into the fabric of your work. Because when our work is coming from the root of being trauma-informed, that's the shape that our work will ideally become. So looking at time, I'm good. So what clients need from us is to ask ourselves, in what way is the work we do trauma-informed, and in what way isn't? Why do our policies exist? Who wrote them, and what beliefs are they rooted in? Where do those beliefs come from? I'm talking about getting really personal and asking questions. And that also includes extending that same consideration to folks who they might have biases against. And alongside of that, also, thinking about situations where our well-intended policies might actually be hurting people, or might result in folks that we want to reach not being able to reach us. Again, regardless of what our services are. So, I think the cool thing about this conference right now is, that we're already talking about this. I was a little nervous to talk about this because I was like, I don't want to be too radical, but we're already here, so I'm just going to go for it. And we're all working with the same populations here, so you can't put any individual perfectly in, one service silo, right? This person's experiencing housing insecurity, so they're going to go over to, the homelessness land, and, this person's only a pet parent, so they're going over to, veterinary land, and this person is, experiencing a disability, so I'm going to send them to the doctor. It's more like, here's this one person, I have major depression, chronic pain, I lost my job, my limited support network is on the other side of the country from me, and I have an emotional support animal. Oh, and he's also a Rottweiler. So it's sort of more like that, right? It's this one person who has so many different factors going. So if we limit ourselves to only looking at somebody through the lens of our own scope of practice, we're missing out on the whole story. So to wrap it up, I guess my answer is a little more abstract to these issues about how to reach, more pets and how to reach more people. And I just genuinely think that what we need to do is just destroy the people and animal versus people framework. Meaning, like, I'm an animal person, so I work with animals, and I'm a people person, so I work with people. I know I just started out by sort of using that language myself, but I think that it's time to throw it in the trash because we're all collectively ready to go deeper than that. We're all, by our presence at this conversation, ready to go deeper than that. You know, we're moved beyond, you know, well, I guess I'll deal with animals because the person I'm helping cares about it, or, you know, the other side of that. I guess I'll deal with people because I want to help their animals. You know, we want to lower barriers to connection and cooperation because society is complicated, and the only way we're going to reach people is by connecting with our community and working together, and treating people as complex individuals. You know, we're all people. None of us are just animal people. We're all people. We're imperfect individuals who, along with our imperfect pets and imperfect children, make up our communities. So yeah, I think all of our clients, all of our families, regardless of why they might come through our doors, just really need us to be able to respect that they're the reliable narrators of their own stories, and they need their goals to be met by all of their service providers. They need that to be met with compassion and respect, regardless of our personal feelings and biases about who they are, you know, what their goals are, and, you know, where they're coming from. I think that the work starts at home. And I'll digress on that.
Yeah, thank you, Colleen. And I think, like, even as a pet program, us understanding that that primary goal may not, and is oftentimes not related to a pet. People love their pets, but sometimes it is third, fourth, fifth on the list of the thing that they can think about during the time that they're in shelter. So I just had one more closing slide, but I almost want to leave it with Colleen's radical, like, closing statement. It's not moving. But really, just in thinking about our advocacy for, you know, pet welcoming services and programs, you know, really focusing on pets as part of the family. Pets as a protective factor. You know, that's the Misty story. That's the, you know, this was a young child who was self-harming because she didn't have her emotional support animals with her. Like, they are protective factors for so many people. And this right to companionship for all people without judgment. I think that is, you know, a theme of this conference, but I think it's just something that all of our advocacy and all of the work that we're doing to promote co-sheltering in the DV and the homeless systems needs to be rooted in that belief. And we just wanted to end our little section. We can add to the Q&A and with playing another audio clip. So this should work this time.
Bella is a part of our family, and she had been for 5 years by the time we were placed. And being able to go through that huge transition with our pet just made the healing process so much more better. Not many people are that understanding in understanding that a pet they're just not a pet. You know, they are part of the family. And when it comes down to making these hardball decisions about your life and wanting to move forward, it's never easy when you have a pet, because she's not just my pet. You know, she relies on me just the same way we rely on her for love. So having her in shelter was the greatest thing.
And it just, sorry, there's a little abrupt cut, but just that is a family that actually was able to find permanent housing. And in reconnecting with her recently, I learned that they also have added a little cat to their family that matches this dog. And so just want to share that, like, that was that additional context. That was someone we worked for over a year to actually get into shelter. Because if we had more time to talk about this, we could talk about all the complications with catchment, where it's safe for people to be in shelter, the size of units that are required for different family sizes. And so that was someone we had a really long relationship with, trying to do that safety planning to get her into our program, and to know that her family is now somewhere safe in permanent housing with now 2 pets is just a really wonderful feeling. And I think closing for our little section. Again, I think this has been shared in the chat, but we have a shared email address, which is really the easiest way to get in touch with any of us, our entire team. gets these emails. We respond to them super quickly. And then just sharing our URI, nyc.org/pals, our website. I will stop sharing now.
Wow. Thank you so much, everyone. I mean, I'm just like overcome with, gratitude and excitement and, just full of hearing people all, talking about all of these great things that are happening, that they're doing, and also acknowledging all of the challenges, and particularly this challenge around, sort of this siloed communities that are doing this work to help, and how we bring people together. I'm just so grateful for you all, spending this time and being here with us. I'm really excited for what will come. So let's see. I guess we have some time for at least 15 minutes for Q&A. So if people, I'm going to try to go back in the chat and look. But if you want to raise your hand, I don't know if you know how to do that, but if you go down, I don't know if I know how to do that. I think if you go down to reactions, there's a raised hand.
That's right, Ann.
Yeah, icon. And then if you hit that, then you'll pop to the top and I'll be able to see you. And if you want to ask a question, or you can pop question in the chat box, and we have a few questions also. But I would love to get people's, I know a lot of people were asking questions. Let me see.
We can always do a pet share in the meantime.
Sure, always. Always.
Mine's very boringly sleeping behind me.
Oh, that's not boring.
For anyone who's been on a Zoom with me previously has seen that.
What about in Allie's when she had, I took a picture of Allie with her cat behind her and the little cat unicorn painting also. So there's the real cat and the cat unicorn. So cute when you were talking, Allie. Yes.
Everybody needs a cat unicorn.
Yes, absolutely. It was adorable. We have a thing in our little group, when we have our My Dog is My Home meetings, staff meetings and board meetings, where we all kind of bring our animals in and just kind of like, they're part of the meeting basically, which they want to be anyway, as you know. Exactly. Okay, so Carolyn popped up a couple questions that people had asked earlier. Thanks, Carolyn. Amber asked, from a college at an animal shelter. Oh, sorry if it's a bit off topic from domestic shelter design. How could a front desk person at an animal shelter appropriately probe to identify if someone is at risk / suffering domestic violence? For example, someone seeking housing options, or maybe at the point of surrender, but hasn't outright shared that they're a victim. Do we have training manuals, etc., on appropriate language or sensitivity?
We love this question. I mean, it's definitely appropriate for the work that we do. Lina or Colleen, if either of you want to answer.
Yeah,
I mean,
absolutely. Oh, sorry.
You can go, Colleen, go ahead.
Yeah, I'll keep it quick because I want to hear what you have to say about it too. But yeah, this is a great conversation because I think that, here are the barriers. How do we make a connection? And so, if you're at a veterinary office walking in, just to get your cat vaccines and you're experiencing domestic violence, you might not think, oh, maybe this is a safe place for me to bring that up. Is this safe for me to disclose? So what you can do to start out with is just to make sure that it's visible that you are a safe place. So display literature about the intersection of domestic violence and housing insecurity and pet issues. If you have human and animal resource providers around you, see if they have literature about what their resources are and display it. I know most veterinary places have their brochures displayed and all kinds of pet care posters. Just include some stuff on DV. And another thing is to, ask if you have any local domestic violence providers who want to come into your office and just give the staff a general 101 intro to DV training. Those are the two big things that I'm thinking of.
Yeah, I think that that's a really good point, just because like they're the experts, and that there's going to be a level of discomfort on any survivor's part in disclosing, just because they're not good. Like Colleen said, they're not going to expect it. The thing that I was going to bring up is that like make sure that you have somewhere private to talk to people in, or at least give them the space. I don't know that the first time I met someone at a vet office, if I would be like, are you experiencing domestic violence? That would be very intense for the survivor if that is what's going on. But giving them a quiet space, asking them just if they're okay, asking them if they're having an okay day. You can say, you look a little upset. Is everything all right? Like make a human to human connection, right? And then like, because you're a vet office, there's always a good chance that like maybe they will come back for shots in 6 months, a year. If you can build a relationship, it's much more likely that somebody's going to disclose. But go ahead, Danielle. I don't want to chat all the day.
No, just that idea of like creating that safe space and building that relationship is part of that, like that trauma-informed work of just for disclosing domestic violence. It may take a couple of visits. So if you're a community outreach program, or you have repeated contacts with a client, it's those repeated safe contacts that may get people feeling comfortable and able to, willing to disclose. And I was going to second what Lina said. I think very like getting frontline staff, like just to have the very basics of the dynamics of domestic violence and a very basic understanding of the language, and then making sure they know who those experts are, because there are people in your community, national hotlines, state hotlines, that are there for those conversations. And there's community resources that are there to do that work with people. And so not all frontline animal shelter staff need to be DV advocates. That's not, it's not necessary. We can be the experts in what we do and work together to connect people to those services.
I love that, Danielle. And if I could just add really quickly, because I know I specifically call it out when we talk about collaboration. And so when we talk about it with animal shelters, veterinarians, human services organizations, like we make it very explicit, like animal shelter folks, don't do this on your own. Like you need to get training. You need to get that initial training. You need to have ongoing training. Like that should be part of your collaboration. And absolutely having the resources to back it up, like the URI folks just shared, have your local resource, have safeplaceforpets.org, know what resources they can access. And the other thing that, and kind of in that piece of like reaching out to the other aisle, the reason why we tell animal shelters to ask about this question, to ask about domestic violence at relinquishment, is that if they don't ask, they don't know that they have pet survivors of domestic violence. And now those pets are going on to adoption floors potentially. And so it creates a risk to the pet, it creates a risk to the staff. And so it really is important, that we do everything we can to keep people and pets together.
So one other thing that could happen is to have a pet safety planning form, whether it's at an animal shelter, a veterinary clinic. There's an example that you can download off of the safetyprogram.org website. You can just use that one, or you can create your own, and that has the resources, because if they're not ready to disclose that, they might at least be able to grab that or even take a picture of it, or you can put it on a website and they can start looking at it to start getting that planning ready. So yeah.
That's what I was thinking, Allie, is if you could have a poster in your lobby of where they could go when they are ready. Or I've seen animal shelters that even do the simple old school, like pull tab things in the bathrooms. So
yes,
you do have to be creative.
Yeah.
I'm just putting in a link to our survivor focus poster that directs to folks to safeplaceforpets.org. So
the local DV, oh, sorry, Katie, the local DV organization in your community is going to have those resources, and they're going to want to give you pull tabs and cards and flyers and posters for sure. So that's also like a great way to build that relationship.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah, big believer in not doing it alone. There's no way for us to do it alone. We're dealing with multi-sector, intersectional issues with, that are very layered and very complex, and, it requires all of us to be at the table and to be working in a coordinated fashion. So Sarah asked, she said, I run a foster program that provides foster to pets of people who are staying in shelter. And this approach keeps the pet safe, but provides minimal comfort to the family. How do you recommend introducing the idea of co-sheltering to our local shelter?
Give them the safety startup manual. Let them read when they're ready. I mean, that's the one thing that I found is that the shelter, and Danielle, maybe you can even talk to this, because I know when Nat, your executive director, when he heard about this, he was ready. He was open to it because he had done a little bit of research. So if you can just hand them something, they can start reading about it, then the conversation can happen. So that's my recommendation.
Thanks. The other thing I would also offer is just that, I really feel like those stories, the actual, personal stories of people's lived experience are something that really cuts through any kind of, bias or narrative that somebody might have. So if you can get your hands on things like that, that's really helpful too.
That's what I was going to share too. A huge part of the development and growth of the PALS program is buy-in from staff. And, staff who start working in a domestic violence shelter because they want to work with domestic violence survivors. There weren't pets in that mix. Like when they got, not that they're anti-pets, but it just like, it wasn't a part of the job. And, if you're not an animal lover, you haven't had that experience, or you have a fear of animals, you don't understand, you just don't have that understanding. So I think a lot of the work for us that happened with, people making that jump of why the sheltering in unit was so effective was seeing the difference in their work with the clients of the time before the pet was with them. And then once the pet came, and realizing, wow, this is an entirely different individual that I'm working with, because they're not concerned about their pet's welfare. They're not missing their pet. They have that comfort. They have that companionship. And now there is this, like now that distraction is gone, and they can focus on other parts of their healing in a different way. And so those are the types of stories that once our staff sees, they saw them firsthand, and then, can share that experience. But I agree. I think that's a huge part of it.
Yeah, I'd like to jump in here too, because this question also has it's related really nicely to another excellent question that I see in the chat about, if you're advocating for human providers to accommodate pets, how can we do that with a balanced narrative that, isn't only prioritizing the pets? So I think these things go hand in hand. And I just speaking to what my role is, a lot of what I do is going into our own shelters where we accept pets, and it's human services, just like animal services, there's high turnover. So we're constantly going back to our sites and sitting down with staff and talking to them about our program. And again, acknowledging, we know you didn't take this job because you wanted to work with animals. We know that. So let's talk about what your anxieties are. Are you afraid of dogs? Let's talk about dog behavior. Let's make sure you're equipped with this information. So it's partially that. And then I think as far as staff buy-in, and sorry, I just lost my train of thought. When we're connecting with human services, I think that, again, the need is so great. Everybody's so busy and burdened with the need. And so if your approach is to first say, I want to talk to you about animals, they're going to say, we have enough to talk about. We have enough to deal with. But if you say, hey, I think we have some shared goals. We have, your population cares. A lot of your population cares about this. A lot of this population, isn't able to access you because of this. How can we help you? What do you need from us in order for you to take this on in whatever way you're able? And so it's really just, meeting them where they are, just like our folks that have pets.
Yeah. I love this. There's a couple of examples of, people, I've heard this too, and I've worked actually in supportive housing organizations and, in homeless shelters where there was a lot of fear, that if we let one in, 1 million are going to come, we're going to be overwhelmed and all that. And every single time, I or, my crew was able to push for it, and that never happened. And in fact, what would happen is people became really fond of the animals. They really like, oh, it's no big deal at all. Of course it's fine, It's just, yeah, it's this weird thing. And, Katie had written in the comments that, they hear a lot from, the DV, not only that the clients benefit, but the staff also really benefit from having the, of course they do. Bring your animals everywhere. Yeah, so many great comments, and thank you so much. I think we have time for a couple more. I wanted to ask real quick. I had a question for you guys. What is the main reason, do you think, that like especially in New York, where you have all of this sort of DV services, that no other DV programs are taking animals? What is the biggest reason for that, do you think? Anybody can answer that
I
question.
mean, I think that there's that fear that, like, oh my God, we're gonna have 100 pit bulls running through the door. They're gonna bite every child that walks through the other door. Like, there's just an expectation that, there's gonna be like unpicked up poop in every corner. People just kind of assume the worst because, people in human welfare services, it's an overwhelming job to begin with. There's so much to deal with, and then they're like, oh no, what's the worst thing that's going to possibly happen when we let in hamsters?
Yeah, absolutely. And I also feel like people in DV are a lot more sensitive to things that I feel like other services aren't, like the connection that people have with safety and companionship and the things that they love. So I would think that people in DV services would be.
Well, this is a very unique to us problem that we've gotten so big and our capacity has grown. But we do a lot of work with our colleagues. We get a lot of referrals from other providers. We do transfers of people saying, like, we understand this issue, we want it. We're so glad you guys exist, because it's just, it's a whole other thing to build. But I should add, we are working with one other NYC shelter provider, so we may have to change that part of our presentation.
Yeah,
that's awesome.
For them, and and just getting started in that. It's a program which a lot of programs do. They sort of accept 1 or 2 ESAs, and then it's like it's a crisis, so they have a pet that comes in, and then they go, oh, this wasn't so terrible. And look how to help these people. So now let's do something a little more formalized.
I would just add very, very quickly that, like, there is a legitimate concern in New York City, especially about housing after shelter. And that is like a big issue of, like, oh, we're going to let somebody bring their pet into shelter, and then what happens in 6 months or in,
absolutely
3 months when they have to leave.
Sure.
It's complicated. It's super complicated.
Yeah.
So I'm getting a thing that our rooms are going to close in like a minute. And I just want to really quickly thank everybody for a fantastic presentation.